Alright, so I'm going to be putting new seals in the rear differential or gearbox of my Yamaha Wolverine here. So these are the new seals, and the first step to doing that is going to be to remove this skid plate, drain all the fluid all out of the differential, jack the quad up, and then remove the two wheels and hubs from both from the axle. Alright, so I had a really hard time getting that axle out. The hub for the brake assembly was super seized on there, so I was trying to get it off for hours and hours, but I finally just got it. So the next step is going to be to remove your hitch. I just removed mine if you have one. So I took mine off, but next you're going to take off all the bolts, basically securing this rear gearbox on. So that's these two top bolts, and there's one here and one there. And then we'll remove the nuts on the studs for the back of the gearbox as well. Remove this line and it should slide right off. I also wanted to mention that this super clean floor absorbent works really well. So if you're looking for a good floor absorbent, be sure to go check that out. You guys saw how much oil was spilled on the, gear oil here was spilled on the floor earlier. And after you let that stuff sit, you can just sweep it away right into a pan and throw it out. And you can see it's just clean underneath. It's all nice and dry and super easy to clean up. So be sure to go check that out. Alright, so sorry, I've done a kind of a bad job explaining this so far, but essentially here's the deal. So once you take off all the bolts to get this part off, you're going to have your ring gear and then your input gear inside of here. Just inspect those. If they look worn out, you might want to look into replacing it or something, but if those are fine, you should be good there. Next thing you want to check is your bearings. So there's one bearing here. Just slide your, my fingers are dirty, so I'm not going to do it now, but with a clean finger, just rotate the bearings. If it feels crunchy and worn out, go ahead and replace it. Next bearing you're going to want to check is your wheel bearing here. So this is a wheel bearing. This is not part of the, if you order a bearing kit for this, this gearbox here or whatever you want to call it, it probably won't come with this bearing, so just keep that in mind. But just rotate this bearing. If it feels nice and smooth and not crunchy, you're probably good. If it does feel crunchy, go ahead and replace it. Next is your input shaft, right? Because this is where your drive shaft is going to connect to here on the quad. Just rotate this. If that feels crunchy, just like the others, replace it. If it feels good, you're probably fine. Next, for the seals. So I ordered a seal kit just for this gearbox here, and it only comes with 3 seals. So these 3 seals are, so I thought this one on the outside, so there's one seal that you'll see on the quad on the outside. That is a dust seal, so that's not actually keeping any oil, it's just holding dust and debris out. And then if you take that off, behind it is going to be a seal to protect your bearing from any liquids or water or puddles you go through, whatever. And that is a wheel bearing seal, so that won't come in the kit that you buy for the gearbox here. So just keep that in mind. I didn't know that, and I thought they sent me the wrong one or whatever, but they didn't. And that one looks like this. And if you want the size, it's a, these are metric. You can't see the numbers on camera, but it's a 47 by 70 by 8.5 millimeter seal. You can buy them in a kit, or you can just buy them by the size. So this will fit right into there like that. And if you take this thing apart, you might as well just change seals like that. But if you don't want to, then that's up to you. And then, so as I was saying before, is there's 3 seals for the actual gearbox itself. The first one will be behind that bearing, that wheel bearing there, and that'll be the one holding out oil. So if you have an oil leak there like me, then this is the seal that's going bad. So this seal, in order to replace this one, which it might be kind of hard to see, let's see. Yeah, so if you look in there, you can kind of see after this first bearing here, there's a black seal in there. It's hard to see on camera, but it's in between those 2 bearings there. And in order to get that one out, it looks like what we have to do is push out this wheel bearing. So I'll probably do that in a press, but if you don't have a press, you can probably get away with doing it with a punching hammer or whatever. Push that out, and then I should be able to just get this seal out there and slide the new one in. Next is your input seal. So this one's easy to see. So I should be able to just put some self-tapping screws in there, or a couple picks, and get that one out. See, that one's right there. And that one will come in the kit for this gearbox, just like the other one. The third seal is going to be on the other side. This is the big seal. So this one's right there, super easy to see. It's red, it's right there. And the way you change that one is when you take this off, this whole ring gear here can slide out of the outside of the case here. So if you just push it out, come off like that. And then it looks like I'm gonna have to actually pull this bearing out as well in order to get that one out, because this is gonna be blocking it on this side. So I'm gonna see how I need to do that. But yeah, I should be able to just pop this seal out, or pop that bearing out somehow, and then go ahead and change out that seal. I think the way to do that is probably put this in the oven, but I'll let you guys know how I wound up getting that out. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the seals. And then you want to check where all the seals seal and everything else. Now my hands are dirty, so I don't want to touch this gear, but this is going to be where the seal actually seals up against. So if that has a deep groove in it or rust or whatever, the seal probably won't be able to seal onto that. So you're probably going to have to refinish that, or just buy a new piece there. And that goes for any of the other seals. If you have like grooves and divots in the axle or whatever it's sealing against, it won't be able to do its job and it won't be able to seal properly. So just be careful of that. All right, so I pressed this wheel bearing out here. You can see it here. And this one still feels nice and good. Again, rotate it, check for any play in it. If it's good, you don't really have to replace it. And then in here, so after you press it out, the reason I pressed it out again was so that I could replace that seal, but it looks like in there's actually a lip which would prevent me from pressing the seal out from this direction. And that's a problem because I can't get it out from the other way without getting this gear or this bearing out here, and I'm not really sure how to get it out. My guess, because I don't have a service manual for this quad, I couldn't find one online, but my guess is that I'm gonna have to put this whole thing in the oven here, and that will, I'll heat up the outside of this case, and then as this heats up, it'll expand and that'll drop the bearing out. That's how I got all the bearings out of my Yamaha Warriors case. Other than that, I don't know how it would come out, so I just need to get like basically all the oil out from the outside of this, or off of the outside of this casting here, and then I'll throw it in the oven at around probably 230-ish degrees, 220-ish degrees, and hopefully it pops out. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. All right, so in order to get that bearing out, basically what I had to do was I was going to heat this up, but I didn't really want to put this in the oven. So what I did was I just took a hammer and punch basically, and from the other side, first I cut the seal so that I could get as much room in there as possible, and then I just used a fine or a small tipped punch to punch the bearing out. And of course, after doing that, I obviously destroyed the bearing because I mean, just look how small that thing is. I was trying to do it without damaging it, but it was in there so tight, and I kept hitting it on the edge lip, that lip there, but it still wound up damaging it. So unfortunately, I had to buy a new bearing for that. This is a really expensive part directly from Yamaha, but I did some research and I found the part number, so I'll get that, and I'll show you guys that as well in case you damage this bearing. But yeah, so in order to get that out, all I had to do was hit it with a punch a bunch of times. But you can see I did eventually get that seal out of there. So I have a new one of these bearings coming today, and I'll be able to put that in, and we should be all set there. So then for the rest of the seals, like this one, what I'm going to do is try and screw in some screws into that seal right there and see if I can't pull it out that way. And then for this one, I'm going to see if I can just press this bearing out. Well, first I'm going to try and cut away at the seal here, and then see if I can't just press the bearing right out of this piece here. And then once I get that done, I should be able to just pull this old seal out and replace it with the new one. All right, so to cut this seal, I found another bearing. This is just an old bearing that I'm going to use to press the old one right out. So that should work good, but in order to get that in there, I'm going to have to cut this seal here. You can inspect these springs too and see if they're like broken or something. If they're broken or anything, or they're stretched out in one spot, you can tell the seal's definitely bad by that. But this one seems okay, and the seal wasn't leaking. But since I have this apart, I'm going to go ahead and change everything anyway. All right, and yeah, so that doesn't fit perfectly in there. So I mean, what I could do is just put this on 2 blocks of wood and hammer it out with a punch, but I'd rather not do that. It might wreck the bearing. And since I have the press, I'd like to use it. but I don't know how I'm gonna get this out. All right, let me see if I can find another bearing that'll fit in there, just perfect enough to where I can get it out. All right, so I did find this gear here. It's out of a peerless transmission, and that fits right in there perfect. So I'm gonna set this up on the press and see if I can't press this bearing out. All right, so you can see it here on the press. And by the way, this press is okay for the money. It's just 12-ton Harbor Freight press, and it does the job. It's fine. But you can see we got it there. I have it in 2 blocks of wood, so that way we don't damage the surface on here. But yeah, we should be able to just press this right out. And it just came right out. Alright, so I also just used the press to get that seal out of there. So the next step is going to be, I'm going to try and clean this off as much I can, because while I was waiting for the bearing, this piece was sitting on my workbench, and you can see it's gotten a little bit of dirt on there, and I'd like to have this perfectly clean before I put it back in. So I'm going to try and clean this off as best I can. And we'll just slide the new seal in there, and that bearing I'm going to reuse because it's not bad, and this piece should be good to go. So just like I mentioned earlier, the first thing I'm going to do now is just clean this off before I put the seals in. And the main thing I want to get here is obviously the inside, because we don't want dirt inside of the gearbox there, but also this O-ring here. I forgot to order a new O-ring, but this one looks fine. So I'm going to go ahead and reuse that, and that's the way that these two pieces are going to seal together without letting any oil escape, any of the gear oil. So you want to make sure this is super clean without any contaminants, or obviously any burrs or anything like that. So that would cause it to not seal correctly. So in order to clean that off, I'm just going to take a paper towel and a little bit of super clean, just the regular super clean. This stuff works great. This is the best cleaner degreaser I've found by far. I'm just going to take a little bit of this and just clean the edge. That way we can make sure that there's nothing in the way that's going to affect the seal there. Just know that after, if you do use super clean or pretty much any cleaner and degreaser, it'll erode or corrode the aluminum casting here. So you want to get another paper towel afterwards and just wipe it off with water to make sure it doesn't corrode anything or eat it or anything like that, because we don't want that. It's looking good, nice and clean. It's also got no oil left on it, so I'm going to get a new fresh clean paper towel, a little bit of water. Whoops. And just wipe that off. Make sure this dries obviously before I put it back in. Actually, you know what? I'm also going to take this O-ring off, just because I want to get this actually nice and clean. But yeah, I'll clean that groove one more time. So since that bearing is installed, we can go ahead and try and pull out the next seal, which was this one. Looks like it's pretty hard to get to. So what I'm going to do is take some sheet metal screws, self-tapping, or I guess not self-tapping, but just sheet metal screws. You probably use wood screws. And I'm just going to try and drill them right into that seal there and pull on the screws to try and pull the seal out. All right, so it looks like there's metal in there. So what I'm going to try and do is just drill a really tiny hole in there and then drill the screw into there. All right, so I forgot to hit record, but I was able to pull that seal out of there. You can see there's just a bearing in there now, and this is the way I did it. Drilled 2 holes, stuck some sheet metal screws in there, and it pulled right out. So that's out now. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and just try and install this seal. So I got that one out. So it looks like it's gonna be this guy here. So I just want to make sure it's all clean first, and everything looks good inside of there. Again, put a little bit of oil outside of the seal. Okay, so now that that's all oiled up, just go ahead and drop this in. And I gotta see if I can come up with a way to press that. Oh, you know what? Since this one won't be exposed on the inside, we're also gonna go ahead and put a little bit of oil on the inside of the seal as well. And that's the most important part, the inside of the seal, because otherwise that can wear out really quick without any oil or anything there. So that's very important that you put that on. I'm going to put that on the other seals too, but just after I'm done with this. Okay, now that that's on there, I'm going to get a socket that's exactly the same size as that and just push it in. All right, so I just got this new bearing in here. You can see it's pretty similar to the old one. This is the old one. Here's a new one. It looks like this one just has a bigger lip on the end of it, whereas this one has a smaller lip and a plastic cage on the that's exposed there. But this is the same size and it should work fine. So if you guys are looking for this bearing cheap and you don't want to buy it from Yamaha, here's the number. It's a See if you can see that. TA5520Z. And this was like 13 bucks, and I think the Yamaha one was like 40 bucks. But Yamaha doesn't make bearings, so they're really just taking a bearing made by a different manufacturer and slapping their own label on it. So this is the way to go if you're looking to get a new bearing. Just look up that number and you should be able to order it from a bunch of different places. But in order to get this in properly, you can see, right, it's supposed to go right in here. I didn't put the new seal in yet, but it's supposed to go right in there. And obviously it's a tight fit because it needs to stay in there without coming out. So a trick to get this in, these bearings in, is to freeze them, and then you can heat up the casting here. So I'm going to try and put this into the freezer and see if that'll get it cold enough. If not, I'm going to buy some air duster, turn the can upside down, just spray the outside. That should get it really, really cold, and that should shrink the metal just slightly, enough to where you can slide it right into the, I guess you wouldn't really call this a knuckle, but the casting of the differential there. So I just pushed this seal in. That's in there all nice and tight. That was the one that was originally leaking. See, that's in there good, all the way in. So now it's time to get the that other bearing in there, the one that I was going to freeze. So here's the bearing. Let's see, just fit in there, and yeah, it feels really tight still. So just set that there. All right, so I was able to get that bearing in. I tried freezing it and that didn't work. So I just really carefully pressed it in with the press and using the old bearing so that it was the perfect diameter right there. And I got it in and I didn't damage it. It spins nice and freely there, so that should be all good to go. So next, or the last thing really here, will be to just press in our wheel bearing here. But actually, since this thing had been washed out with the gear oil that was leaking out of here, I'm going to go ahead and just clean this out and pack it with fresh grease. Then we'll go ahead and install that and grease, like especially this new bearing, but grease all the bearings and the new seals, and put it all back together, and it should be good to go. I just reinstalled this rear differential here. It's pretty straightforward, and you can see I also put in the bearing there, the wheel bearing there. I packed it full of brand new grease. You can see it's bright red in there, and installed this new seal, which actually got a little bit dirty, but that's okay. We'll clean that off before we put the axle in. But in order to put this differential on, basically what you need to do is just use gasket maker in this seam here. And then I believe you need Loctite on, it's either these nuts, these studs there, or the bolts that mount the gearbox onto the swing arm there. But I put the Loctite here because it looked like there was residue of Loctite before. So I just used Loctite blue there. If they start coming off, I'll use red. But yeah, you make sure you use gasket maker there. I use gasket maker here as well, along with the O-ring, but you don't have to do that. It wasn't like that before. And then obviously just stuff like attaching this line here. But basically all there is to do now is just slide the axle back through. When I do that, I'm going to use Loctite, or not Loctite, Never Seize on all the splines, because I had a really hard time getting that off. So I've pretty much got everything back in here, got the axle all set in there. And then I got this dust cover on, and that rear bearing cover and seal, as well as the brake rotor there. So, and then I made sure to put Never Seize on these threads, or those splines rather, and then I'll put some Never Seize on those as well. And I also had to run a die over these threads there because they were super screwed up even after I used a socket to get this axle out. It still screwed up the threads, and I just ran a die over both sides, so now those thread on real nice, and shouldn't have any issues. One other thing I forgot to mention before is when you're trying to get this gearbox on, what you have to do is kind of line up the drive shaft with the splines on the gearbox here, and the way to do that is pretty much just get a long screwdriver and try to align it, and then once you get it kind of set in there, you're going to have to kind of rock the quad back and forth to get the splines to actually align with each other, and that way it'll slide right in. And then put a bunch of grease in there as well, so that way it can move around in there, and it should come off easily and go on easily. So that's how I did it. And obviously using gasket maker, put it on, hand tighten everything, wait an hour, and then go ahead and torque everything down after that, and that's how you get a good seal with gasket maker. So I went ahead and did that. So now all that's left to do basically is just put this brake caliper back on and then slide the hubs back on and put the wheels on, and we should be good to go. Alright, so I got this thing all back together now. I rode it a bunch and it doesn't seem to have any more oil leaks. This was the main one that was leaking before. And I checked the fluid level in this case here and it looks like it hasn't dropped at all. So this thing should be free of all oil leaks now, which is good. So that's pretty much it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.